The moment I stepped into the living room, I knew something was off. My family laughed as I noticed my spot at the table was marked with a cruel joke. I stayed calm, played along until I stood up, said what no one expected, and left them to sit with the silence I left behind. Hi Reddit. I'm Nora, 40F, and this story has been sitting on my chest like a stone for a while now. I wasn't sure I was going to share it, honestly. But lately, I've been replaying that night over and over in my head, thinking about the way everything unfolded, how it all escalated from the tiniest cracks in the surface of my family to something I never saw coming. This isn't a short story, and it didn't explode all at once. It built slowly, like steam in a sealed jar. So I'm going to tell it that way too. If you're looking for instant karma, it's not here. At least, not yet. To set the scene, I'm the oldest of 3 siblings. My brother Caleb is 36, and my sister Ivy is 33. We all grew up in a small town in northern Pennsylvania. Think long winters, familiar faces, and a place that never quite lets you forget who you used to be. I left after college and never moved back. I live in Vermont now with my partner, Jamie, and we've built a peaceful, if quiet, life there. We run a small second-hand furniture store together, and our days are filled with sanding, refinishing, delivery runs, and coffee in the workshop. It's not flashy, but it's ours. My parents still live in the house we grew up in. My mom, Ruth, is the kind of person who prides herself on appearances, neat hair, holiday decorations up the day after Thanksgiving, casseroles brought to every church potluck. But there's a layer underneath it all. She doesn't scream or slam doors. She smiles a lot. She hugs tightly. But her words can slice when she wants them to. It's always subtle, calculated, polished with that. I'm just trying to help shine. Dad, Martin, is more passive. He was never cruel, but he's never really intervened in anything either. He's the kind of man who disappears into his garage when things get tense. Likes crossword puzzles. Can name every bird that lands in the backyard feeder, but never figured out how to say no to my mom. Now, Ivy. Ivy's a different story. Where mom uses guilt and grace, Ivy uses charm and chaos. She's beautiful, charismatic, and always has a dramatic story to tell. She talks fast, always the center of attention, always just a little too loud, too shiny. Growing up, she could get away with anything. Broke a neighbor's window? Caleb did it. Snuck out late and stole the car? Nora must have left the keys out. And the worst part? She believed it. She believed she deserved more, that the world owed her extra. She still does. She has a daughter now, Ruby, 7 years old. Quiet, curious, sweet. And though it breaks my heart to say it, already being pulled into Ivy's game of performative perfection. So, that's the background. The real story starts with a phone call in early April. I was closing the shop for the day, pulling the chain down on the front gate, when my phone buzzed in my coat pocket. It was Mom. "Hi, sweetheart," she said, overly cheerful. "Hey, everything all right?" "Oh, yes. Everything's just fine. I was calling about your father's birthday. Dad was turning 70 in May. I had assumed we'd do something small, maybe a few calls, a card, a gift. It had never been a big thing in our family to throw parties for milestones. Ivy had the idea to do a dinner, she said. Just family. At the house. I hesitated. The last time I'd visited for a family event, Christmas, 2 years ago, I'd left early after Ivy made a not-so-subtle joke about how some people think they're better than everyone just because they moved away. When I confronted her later, she cried, accused me of not supporting her as a mother, and Mom told me to just let it go. It's not worth upsetting her. I hadn't been back since. "I don't know, Mom," I said carefully. "You know things haven't been great between Ivy and me." "She's your sister," she said, with that flat finality. "And this is your father. 70 doesn't come around every year." Of course it didn't. And despite everything, I did love my dad. So, against my better judgment, I agreed. "I'll be there," I said. "Just meet Jamie has work stuff that weekend." "Well," Mom replied after a pause, "we'll make room for you. Just like old times." Fast forward to the weekend of the dinner. I drove in on Saturday afternoon. It's about a 5-hour drive from my town to theirs, and I had stayed the night before in a small roadside motel to give myself some space. I didn't want to stay in the house. Not after what happened last time. When I pulled into the driveway around 4:30 p.m., the sky was overcast, that low gray that hangs around in late spring before storms. The porch light was already on, and the front door stood slightly ajar. As I stepped inside, something felt strange. It wasn't one big thing. It was the way the living room was too clean. The way no one greeted me right away. Just the faint murmur of voices coming from the dining room and a distant sound of dishes clinking. I walked through the hallway slowly. The familiar photos on the wall, our old school portraits, Mom and Dad's wedding picture, Ivy holding Ruby as a baby, all stared back at me with frozen smiles. Everything looked the same, but it felt different. Off. Then I heard Ivy's voice from the other room. "She's probably late," she said, light and laughing. "She always makes an entrance." A beat of silence. Then Caleb chuckled. I stepped into the living room. Mom turned at the sound of my boots on the hardwood. "Nora," she said, too loudly. "There you are." She crossed the room to hug me, but it felt rehearsed. Ivy and Caleb were already seated in the adjoining dining room. Ivy with her legs curled up on her chair like she owned the place. Ruby was quietly coloring at the end of the table. "Hey," I said, giving a small wave. Ivy smiled with all her teeth. "We were wondering if you'd changed your mind." "Nope," I said. "Just hit some construction on the interstate." "Of course," she said, turning back to her phone. "It's always something." I looked to Mom, who gave me a tight smile. "Why don't you set your things down and come join us? Dinner's just about ready." I nodded and made my way to the dining room. That's when I saw it. Everyone's places at the table were marked with little folded name cards. Caleb's had been written in careful block letters. Ivy's had a heart next to it. Even Ruby's had a little flower sticker. They were clearly done with care, maybe even Ruby had helped. Then there was mine. Not a card. A napkin. A crumpled, slightly stained paper napkin from the kitchen. Flattened and folded once. Written in looping red ink, scrawled messily across the surface, "Spinster." My breath caught. Just for a second. No one said anything. Not even Ruby, who looked up briefly from her coloring and then quickly looked away. I looked at the napkin, then slowly back up at the table. No one moved. Ivy raised her eyebrows. "You okay?" I opened my mouth. Closed it. Something inside me was buzzing. A deep, low hum. Mom walked in carrying a tray of rolls. She glanced at me, then at the napkin. "Oh, Ivy," she said in that half-chiding tone, like someone teasing a child. "You didn't." Ivy burst out laughing. "Oh, come on. It's just a joke," she said. "Lighten up. You always take everything so seriously." I didn't say a word. I walked to my seat. I picked up the napkin. I looked at it for a long time. And then I sat down. I stayed calm. I played along. But as the first course was served, I was already making a decision. They didn't know it yet. I sat down slowly, folding the napkin once more, as if that might transform it into something less cruel. I slid it under the edge of my plate, where no one could see it but me. It was a small act, but it helped me keep the mask on just a little longer. The chair was just as hard and uncomfortable as I remembered from childhood. I ran my fingers along the tablecloth, one of Mom's old lace ones she brought out for occasions. It had a faint stain near my place, gravy or cranberry, probably from a past Thanksgiving. For a brief moment, I remembered being 10 and knocking over a bowl of applesauce during grace. I'd cried, and Mom had hissed at me to stop drawing attention, even as I tried to clean it up. Funny, nothing ever really changed in this house. Mom bustled between the kitchen and the dining room, placing dishes down like she was presenting a royal banquet. There was roast chicken, potatoes with herbs, some kind of carrot casserole that no one ever liked, but she insisted on making. A pitcher of lemonade with slices of lemon floating like gold coins bobbing in a fountain. Everything in its right place, everything perfectly staged. Caleb sat across from me, quiet but watching. He'd changed a lot physically, broader shoulders, thick beard, but he still had that same habit of avoiding conflict by staying just removed enough to say, I didn't really know what was going on. Ivy, of course, was glowing. That's how she always looked during family events, like the lead actress in a play she wrote herself. She wore a pale green blouse that brought out her eyes, and her makeup was flawless, as always. She had one hand on Ruby's shoulder, gently brushing the little girl's hair back with a practiced tenderness that looked more like performance than instinct. Did everyone see Ruby's picture from her spelling contest? Ivy asked, holding up her phone so the screen faced Dad first. She got second place, but the teacher said she was the only one in her grade to spell magnificent right. That's wonderful, Dad said, smiling at Ruby. Good job, sweetheart. Ruby looked up and gave a shy little nod. Thanks, Grandpa. That's my girl. Ivy beamed, then turned to me. You should have seen her, Nora. She was so confident. Not everyone can say they've got such poise at 7. I nodded, softly. That's great, Ruby. You must have worked hard. She did. Ivy said quickly, before Ruby could answer. And I made sure she practiced every night. Consistency is key at this age. You know how it is. The implication hung in the air. I wouldn't know. No kids. No bedtime routines. No responsibility. I chewed a piece of bread slowly, watching the way Ivy leaned back in her chair, perfectly at ease. Caleb jumped in, trying to steer things back into neutral waters. How's the shop, Nora? Still doing that upcycling thing? That thing. He said it like it was a hobby, a passing phase. It's going well, I said evenly. We got a contract to furnish a couple of new bed and breakfasts up north. Vintage pieces, mostly restored by hand. Keeps us busy. Mom walked in just then with the green beans and set them down between Ivy and Caleb. I'm glad you still have that, she said. It's good to have something to do, especially at your age. Keeps the mind active. At my age, she waved a hand like it was nothing. You know what I mean. It's harder when you don't have a family to focus on. Work gives structure. There it was. Again, the quiet, smiling insinuation that my life lacked meaning. That everything I'd worked for, every choice I'd made, was some consolation prize because I didn't have a husband or a child to define me. I caught Dad glancing down at his plate. Caleb looked at the ceiling. Ivy smirked. You could still have a family, Ivy offered, stabbing a piece of chicken. You're not that old. There's still time if you really wanted it. Or, adoption. Or fostering. Even someone like you could probably manage a pet, at least. She laughed softly at her own joke. Ruby looked up at me, blinking. I couldn't tell if she understood the conversation, but she sensed something. Children always do. I pressed my fingers into my thigh under the table, focused on the pressure. I didn't want to snap. Not yet. Instead, I smiled. I'm pretty content, actually. Content, Ivy repeated. That's the word, isn't it? She turned to Mom. Isn't that what people say when they've given up on actually being happy? Mom chuckled, like they were both just so clever. So wise. Dad cleared his throat. Let's not start this. Oh, it's fine, I said, still smiling. I'm used to it. That made Mom pause. Just a fraction of a second. I don't know what you mean, she said carefully. We've always supported you. You just make unusual choices. Unusual, I repeated, gently setting down my fork. You mean like living on my own terms? No need to be defensive, dear. I glanced at Ivy, who was now pouring lemonade for Ruby, humming quietly like nothing had happened. You know, she said, maybe if you spent more time around family, you wouldn't feel so left out. That was when I knew. This had been planned. Not the dinner, not the meal. The setup, the napkin, the comments, the fake concern. It was a little performance. A way to remind me that I didn't belong anymore. That by leaving, by building a life they couldn't understand, I had forfeited some invisible right to be taken seriously. And they were enjoying it. Even Caleb, who hadn't said anything cruel, wasn't stopping it. He was complicit in that quiet way people often are, by letting it happen. I sat back. Slowly. Let the chair creak beneath me. I looked around the table at each of them in turn. Mom, carefully adjusting the placement of the serving spoons, not meeting my eye. Dad, staring at his plate like it might offer a way out. Caleb, fidgeting with his napkin. Ivy, smiling like the sun, her eyes full of light and sharpness. Ruby, still drawing in her notebook, brow furrowed. The room was too warm. The air felt thick. And still no one apologized. No one said, that was too far. No one pulled back. Because they didn't think it was wrong. They thought I deserved it. They thought I should laugh, play along, accept the joke. Take my little paper napkin title and sit down quietly, where they had placed me. But I didn't. I've been thinking, I said, my voice calm but deliberate, a lot about family. 3 heads turned toward me. Caleb looked wary. Mom's smile thinned, like it was slowly being pressed through a sieve. Ivy sat straighter, as if positioning herself for whatever spotlight she thought was about to shine on her. Dad stayed very still. I used to think family was about blood, I continued, carefully folding the corner of my napkin. Not the paper one. I left that underneath my plate, a reminder that no matter what happened, no matter who did what, family would always have your back, would treat you with basic decency. I let the silence breathe. No one interrupted. The fork in Ivy's hand hovered just above her potatoes. But that's not true, is it? I said, letting my gaze settle on Mom first. Family is just people. People who either show up when it matters or don't. Nora, Mom said, that tight, warning tone starting to edge into her voice. Don't make this into something it's not. It was a joke. Was it? I asked, finally reaching under my plate and pulling out the crumpled napkin. I held it up. This? This was a joke. She opened her mouth, but Ivy got there first. Oh, come on, Ivy said, rolling her eyes. It was a bit of fun. You're always so sensitive. It's no wonder you isolate yourself. You can't even take a joke from your own family. There it was again. That word, isolate. Framed as concern, but always used like a knife. You know what's interesting? I said, laying the napkin flat beside my plate. You all treat me like I'm the one who left. Like I abandoned the family. But if I remember correctly, every time I came back, I was the one expected to fold back into whatever version of reality you'd built around yourselves. We didn't ask you to do anything, Mom said, eyes narrow now. You made your choices. You moved away, you didn't settle down, and then you got upset when things changed without you. Changed? I laughed, quietly. Mom, nothing here ever changes. You're still playing hostess, still pretending everything's perfect as long as no one looks too close. Ivy's still the golden child who can do no wrong, and Caleb, hey, Caleb said, holding up a hand. Don't drag me into this. Why not? I turned to him. You've been sitting here this whole time, hearing the same things I hear, watching the same little stunts. But you never speak up. You just let it slide. That makes you part of it. I didn't do anything, he muttered. Exactly, I said. Ivy leaned back, arms crossed now. Is this going to be one of your lectures? Because if so, maybe you should have just stayed in Vermont with your furniture. The way she said furniture made it sound like trash. Like my whole life was a punchline. No lecture, I said. Just a few things I'd like to clear up. I reached into my bag and pulled out a small manila folder I'd brought with me, originally to give Dad a copy of an old photo I'd restored for his birthday. But I had slipped something else inside, just in case. I opened it slowly, pulled out a stack of neatly printed pages. Mom frowned. What's that? Just something I've been working on, I said. Ivy, you remember Uncle Nate? Ivy blinked. The one who passed away last year? Sure. Why? You remember his estate? The property up near El Calo? That old hunting cabin and the land around it? Ivy nodded. Yeah. What about it? Well, it wasn't just a cabin, I said, flipping to one of the pages and sliding it down the table toward her. Turns out, he'd been quietly developing part of that land. He'd subdivided it, put a lot of money into permits, foundations, even some light construction. No one really knew, not even the lawyer, until they started clearing out his files. Ivy's eyes narrowed. So, he left it to me. Silence. Real silence. The kind that thickens the air. I thought he didn't have a will, Mom said slowly. He didn't. But he had a handwritten letter, notarized, that the probate judge accepted as a directive. In it, he wrote that I was the only one in the family who ever treated him like a human being. I let that sink in. Ivy's mouth opened, then closed. And that land, I said, is now mine. All 30 acres. Including the existing structures, the improvements, the rights. Everything. You've got to be kidding, Caleb muttered. I'm not. I slid another page across the table. I've already filed the development plans. It's being converted into a nature retreat, small cabins, artist residencies, furniture workshops. You know, for people who actually want peace, who create, who make space for others to grow. Mom's voice dropped. You did this without telling the family? I did it without asking for permission, I said. There's a difference. I looked straight at Ivy. And here's the best part. Uncle Nate had an old account. Investment portfolio. Nothing huge, but the earnings were decent. He had one clause. If the land was ever developed with the intention to give back, to educate or preserve or support others, the funds would be released. You can't be serious, Ivy said, her voice sharp now. I am, I said. And I've used part of it to launch something I've been planning for a long time. A foundation. For young artists and craftspeople who don't have family support. You mean? People like me, I said softly. People you laugh at. People you ignore. People you try to humiliate with paper napkins. Ruby looked up again. This time, she was listening. I took one final sheet out of the folder. There's going to be a scholarship, too. For kids who are curious, who are kind, who want to learn. I looked at Ruby. Who deserve more than being raised to believe perfection is more important than compassion. Ivy's jaw was tight. Her hands clenched in her lap. And if you're wondering whether I'm going to share the rest of the inheritance, I added, don't. I'm not. Mom's voice was quiet now, dangerously so. This is vindictive, Nora. No, I said, standing up slowly. This is clarity. I picked up the napkin, spinster, folded it once more, and placed it back on my plate. Thank you, I said, looking around the table one last time, for finally showing me, without question, exactly who you all are. And then I walked out. The hallway seemed brighter somehow. I reached the front door, opened it, and felt the cool spring air hit my face like a blessing. I didn't slam the door. I didn't look back. The drive home felt different than it ever had before. I didn't rush. I took the long way through the hills outside town, past the edges of Uncle Nate's land. It was late spring, and the trees were just coming into their full green. I rolled down the window and let the air in, crisp with a faint scent of pine and mud. The silence in the car was the opposite of the one I'd left at the table. That one had been thick with guilt and discomfort. This one felt clean, peaceful. For the first time in years, I wasn't carrying their voices with me. Not their judgment, not their backhanded compliments, not their disappointment, dressed up as concern. Just me, in the road. It took months for the aftermath to fully settle. At first, there were calls, mostly from Caleb. He left messages that danced around the situation, trying to sound neutral. Just checking in, wondering if you were still thinking about Christmas. He never brought up the dinner. Not directly, but I could hear it in his voice every time. That unease, that quiet guilt he didn't want to name. I didn't respond. Eventually, he stopped calling. Ivy sent one email. Just one. No apology. No acknowledgement of what she'd said. What she'd done. It was short, almost impressively so. Hope you're well. Ruby misses you. If you ever want to talk, you know where to find us. I didn't answer that either. I thought I might feel conflicted, that some part of me would ache or doubt or long for something to fix. But I didn't. Because the truth was, I didn't miss them. I missed the idea of what they could have been, if they'd ever loved me for who I actually was. But they hadn't. And they wouldn't. The retreat center opened the following spring. We called it Hollow Grove. A quiet nod to Elk Hollow, but more welcoming, more alive. I hired a small team: craftsmen, cooks, program coordinators. People who believed in what we were building. The first guests arrived in March: 2 writers, an illustrator, and a young woman who worked with her hands like poetry. She turned reclaimed wood into instruments that sang when you held them. They stayed for 3 weeks. They left crying, full of gratitude and joy. By the end of the year, we had a wait list. I converted one of the outbuildings into a full woodworking studio, filled with the kind of tools I could never have afforded when I was starting out. I taught weekend classes, repaired old furniture with stories in the grain, helped young people build something real with their hands for the first time. One of them, a teenager named Theo, was placed with us by a youth program after his parents kicked him out. He arrived quiet and guarded, barely speaking the first few days. I showed him how to sand down a maple board, how to read the knots, how to shape it without losing its strength. He made his first table that summer. It was crooked, but it stood. "You're not broken," I told him one day, after he asked why I cared so much. "You just weren't raised by people who knew how to see you." He cried. I held space for him. And for the first time, I realized that what my family failed to give me had become the very thing I now offered to others. I didn't see Ivy or my parents again, not in person. When Dad turned 70, they sent out a family-wide invitation for a celebration luncheon. The envelope was cream-colored and thick, the kind that looked expensive without being personal. I didn't go. I heard through a cousin that they were surprised I didn't attend, that Ivy said something about holding grudges and Nora always being dramatic. It made me laugh. The last I heard, Ruby was entering high school. I imagine she's smart. Probably still has that sketchbook. I hope she remembers the part of me that saw her, not through a lens of competition or comparison, but with quiet admiration. I hope she becomes someone new, someone better than them. As for Mom, she called me once. It was almost 2 years after the dinner. The voicemail was short, but there was something brittle in her voice. Not brokenness, she'd never allow that, but the slightest crack in the usual control. "I suppose you've made your point. It's a shame, really. You could have been part of something, but you chose to stand apart. I hope that's what you wanted." She hung up without saying goodbye. I listened to it twice. Then I deleted it. Because she was right about one thing. I had made my point, and I did choose to stand apart. Not because I wanted distance, but because standing with them meant standing for everything they had done to make me small. To mock what they didn't understand. To twist love into obedience and shame. I had no place at that table. So I built my own. And now, I sit at it with people who create, who fail and try again, who believe in healing and quiet courage. I'm not a spinster. I'm not broken. I'm not less. I am the architect of my own peace. And I never once looked back.